I did not bring a slideshow, but I'm going to talk to you about comic books and superheroes and murder mysteries, which are basically the DNA of everything I write. Thanks to House of Speakeasy for having me. This is always a thrill. It's always interesting to speak into a glaring light and assume that people are looking back at you, but we'll just go from there. Anyway, as was noted, Secret Identity, the theme of tonight is the road ahead, but I don't think there is a road ahead without looking back, not to get all like hallmarky about it. Yeah, feels good, right? Yeah, it's nice. So Secret Identity is a novel, a murder mystery set in the comic book industry of 1975. And if you know anything about comics, you know that it was a very different time for comics than today. Today, comics are everywhere. You can turn on the TV and watch a Moon Knight TV show. You can watch the third Ant-Man movie. There's a Arrow TV show. And if you know comics at all, these are like B and C level characters that no one would have ever imagined would be on your television, much less streaming for multiple seasons or featuring Paul Rudd in a starring role. It's kind of amazing. But the comic book industry of 1975 was very different. It was very much a craft that people who were passionate about comics did. They didn't think about words that we kind of bandy about easily today, like IP or ownership or multimedia exposure. It was a job. It was like making the donuts. You wrote 10 issues of Spider-Man, you wrote a couple issues of the X-Men, you drew the issues, you inked the issues. It was very much a churn. And New York City was the hub of the comic book industry. And so Secret Identity is a story about a queer Cuban-American woman named Carmen Valdez, who, like me, is from Miami and is the product of Cuban immigrants who came over after Castro took over Cuba. And like me as well, she grew up with a passion for comics. To the point, her dad learns English from reading comics, from reading Archie comics and reading Mickey Mouse comics. And so it's part of her DNA as a person. And she wants to kind of achieve the dream. So before comics had become this thing that it is now, where it's not even comics, it's pop culture. Like, you can talk about Avengers movies and not really lose the plot, as opposed to what it was like before. And so Carmen moves up to New York City and gets a job at a third-rate. I promise you I'm not just going to recap my novel. I'm going to get to the point. So she gets a job at this third-rate comic publisher called Triumph Comics. And by third-rate, I mean it wasn't even as big as Marvel or DC was at the time. It was the kind of shop that cranked out mediocre books. And so she gets a job as the secretary to this, I guess the best word is blowhard, is the best way to describe her boss. And she uses the opportunity, like anyone else would in that moment, to pitch him ideas. Like, I've got this idea for a superhero, or I've got this idea, here, can you read my script? And finally he tells her, look, it's just not gonna happen. I've got a line of guys around the door that I have to keep fed, freelancers, buddies I owe a favor to, my bookie, I have to keep them engaged. And just stop asking me these questions. You're getting really annoying, and I have other plans for you. Not a great day for Carmen. She goes back to her room, her apartment, her tiny studio that she has a curtain split between so she can share it with a roommate and split the rent. And starts rummaging through her old comics and kind of reconnecting with what made her excited about comics and writing comics and being in comics. She hears a knock on the door, and it's a colleague, this guy Harvey Stern, who is around her age, maybe a few years younger. He works at Triumph as well. He's an editor. And he says, look, I know you want to write comics. I've got this opportunity. Carlisle, the blowhard previously mentioned, he's given me this assignment to write the first female superhero of Triumph Comics' history. There's a catch, though. I want to write it with you, but there's a catch. The catch being she has to write it anonymously. Yeah, it's a drag. It gets worse. Yeah. So they collaborate. Carmen pours her heart into this story. She's got script snippets, she's got character design, she's got ideas, notebooks that are loaded with stuff. This is like her moment. And she delivers. They write 6 scripts over, and this is really in the weeds talk, but 6 scripts over a weekend is a lot. It's a lot. Just take my word for it. She writes these scripts, they get turned in, and she goes into her boss's office and notices that they're turned in with only Harvey's name, which was what they agreed upon. And then Harvey goes AWOL. He doesn't respond to phone calls. He doesn't show up at work. She goes to his apartment, knocks on the door creaks open. She walks into his apartment further. It smells stale. She starts calling his name. It's me, Carmen. Harvey. She gets to his bedroom, and he's dead. So the issue becomes, there's 6 scripts out there with Harvey's name on them. The comic book has become a hit in the interim, in this time after his death. And one thing, if you know comics, you know that it's not just, Stan Lee isn't still writing the X-Men, obviously, for obvious reasons, but he wasn't writing them up until his death. Walt Disney didn't write Mickey Mouse comics. There's changeover. I can write an issue of Spider-Man, and then eventually somebody else will take over. So Carmen knows the clock is ticking. She knows that at some point they're going to reach script number 7, and somebody else is going to get to write her character. And that character is called the Legendary Lynx. Carmen is a woman who works as a secretary in a small office and takes on this vigilante role to avenge the death of her sister. So it's got a lot of her own personal stuff, her baggage, her drama, her dreams, and it's just been wrested away from her. That's Secret Identity now. But the road before, the kind of road that led me to Secret Identity, is the kind of thing that I didn't really realize until after I'd written it. I'm not a thematic writer, meaning I don't think, I'm going to write about overcoming adversity. But it's what I end up writing about. And I usually notice it in the rear view. And so a lot of things, like even Secret Identity, I didn't notice the DNA of the book until now, until after the book's printed and out there and hopefully for sale or whatever, it exists now. And now I kind of know, I was thinking of that. It's a weird way to be. It's just the creative process is strange. But if you'll get into my DeLorean and hop back maybe 20, let's say 15. I'm in college. I'm not a very good college student. Let's preface it that way. I was not a good college student. I was a great extracurricular college student. And I think you can all understand what that means. I don't drink anymore. But I was really involved in the school newspaper. I was a passionate English lit guy. And I remember really vividly, I'm from Miami, so I went to Florida International University, which you don't have to know. It's just this huge, sprawling public university, so big that it has 2 campuses. Miami's not really built for a huge, kind of college towny university. So it's got 2 campuses. There's a bus that goes from South Campus to North Campus. And I have a vivid memory of reading Michael Chabon's The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is a fantastic novel. Everyone should read it. It's about the golden age of comics. And what that means is that's the beginning of comics, like the 1940s, Superman, Batman, all these key characters show up. And it's about these 2 kids, very much like Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who created Superman, these 2 kids who create this character called the Escapist. I'm not going to give you the whole synopsis like I did with Secret Identity, but it's very good. But I remember reading it as a kid, not a kid, I guess a college kid. I remember reading it and just thinking, I want to see the comic books. I want to see the comics that these guys in this book are creating. And I thought, wouldn't that be a great idea if somebody wrote a novel about comic books and then put the comics in there? Okay. And then, as we all do, you file it away and put it in your mental shredder, and maybe it'll come back at some point. And at the time, like I said, not a great college student, but I took creative writing classes. And when I did show up for class, I workshopped a story. And the story was called Sometimes Blue. And it was about an employee at a comic book company who goes through the files of the comic book company and discovers a character that nobody knew existed. I don't know what I got grade-wise because I didn't finish the class. I mean, I know what I didn't do well in the class. I don't know what I got on that assignment. But I had totally blanked on that story until after I'd finished the book. And Secret Identity, which I didn't mention when I gave you the 101, has comic book pages in the novel. So you're reading about Carmen and her plight and how passionate she is about this book, this comic book character, and you get to read the comic book. So you're hopping from prose to comics to prose again. And I think the idea for me was, I really believe in like manifesting things. I think there's a way that if you think about something long enough, if you believe in it long enough, and if you inch toward it and kind of nudge yourself and nudge the people around you, you'll eventually get to what you want. It might not be exactly what you want, but it's kind of what you should have gotten. And so that moment of realization, like holding up Secret Identity, which so many people have been like, congrats on your debut. It's my 7th book. So yeah, thank you. We made it. I think a lot of people want to kind of tap into whatever they think of as instant success or immediate victory or that sudden twist. And there is no sudden twist. I think everything we do kind of builds on what we did before. And the road ahead is very much a product of the road before. Another moment for me, going even further back, is I was in middle school, and shocker, I was a nerdy comic book fan as a kid. Not on the football team, not like super athletic, and I was a huge Spider-Man fan. And I think it's interesting, when you're a Cuban-American kid in Miami, you don't feel that sense of other until you leave Miami, because the Cuban community is so vibrant, it's so big. But I definitely felt it when consuming media, especially television, books. I didn't have those anchors to identify with characters. So I'm sitting in class, and this other kid says, hey, give me $5 and I'll give you this new Spider-Man comic. That was like the whole comic book black market of Miami middle school. And I pick up the comic, and it's called Spider-Man 2099. And how many of you have watched Into the Spider-Verse? Yeah, okay, good. It's popular. But at the time, there was no Spider-Verse back then. There was Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and then there was now this guy, Miguel O'Hara. Now, the last name is a little misleading because that sounds Irish. He's Mexican-Irish. And my point is, when I saw that book and I started reading it, I was like, oh, okay. There's not just Peter Parker, struggling white guy, but still like married to a supermodel and able to swing around town with web shooters and time travel and all that stuff that's going on. There's this guy in the future who's kind of like me, like minus the superpowers and not an adult, but a lot like me. And that sense of identification didn't really kind of come into my view or really kind of set in for me until much later when, after the success of Secret Identity, Marvel reached out and they were like, we want to do this novel, this Spider-Verse book, and we want you to write this Spider-Verse book with the 2 Latinx superheroes, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and Araña, who's a teenage girl from Brooklyn who has spider powers. And my point is that it's hard to really look forward if you don't know what came before. And so I try to really be mindful of what came before, because I know there's the DNA of what makes the future. It's not, let's all like kumbaya about it. But I mean, there really is a theme there that I think about, especially in terms of the day-to-day. And I try to focus on each day as just one opportunity to get a step or two closer to the things I want, or the things that I dream of. And just the idea that I had that thought forever ago on a train, like probably hungover, reading a book, and then 20 odd years later, that book is something that exists and has gotten some acclaim I'm extremely thankful for. So anyway, the road ahead is the road back. So I appreciate you guys listening to me, and thank you so much for having me.